Right, so if you are the sort of person who would like to see Wes Streeting utterly eviscerated for wrongdoing within the NHS that he's already been up to just 2 months into the job as Health Secretary, then for once an interviewer has actually done this live on national TV. They've actually held him to account. The gut-wrenching and deeply unfortunate part of this story, however, is that I'm forced to give props to GBeebies for being the ones who did it, though having said that, the interviewer has been a mainstream, albeit right-wing newspaper scribbler for many years, so it does go to show that mainstream media folk actually are capable of real journalism and actually holding power to account when they want to. So isn't it a crying shame they tend to be so selective about when they do that, and are only doing it now that Labour are in government? I expect we'll probably see more of this as they seek to rehabilitate the Tories, or even worse, big up Reform UK Ltd, as if they need any more attention. Motivations aside though, power should be held to account always, and a minister, in this case Wes Streeting, sharing official government documents with someone that is completely unelected and unappointed because they're a mate, because they're Labour, because they're an advisor. How many times have we heard this one before, and Streeting fell back on his customary unapologetic arrogance as a defence? In any other government, this would be career-ending stuff. In Starmer's, you just can't help but think it won't be.
You mentioned a former health minister there, Andrew Lansley. Can we talk about another one, Alan Milburn? Why have you been inviting Alan Milburn to meetings in the Department for Health and apparently, according to the Sunday Times, sharing official sensitive documents with him when he's completely unelected, he's unappointed, he's unaccountable to the electorate, and yet he's got a multi-million-pound stake in a consultancy firm that advises on health matters?
Alan Milburn has an outstanding record as Health Secretary under the last Labour government, and unlike poor old Victoria Atkins, who's doing the round this morning, who couldn't turn to any of her Conservative predecessors because they always left the waiting list higher than they found them, every single Labour Health Secretary alive today, from Alan Milburn to Andy Burnham, presided over NHS improvements that gave the Conservatives a golden inheritance of the shortest waiting times and the highest patient satisfaction.
Have you shared official sensitive documents with him?
I make no bones about the fact that in opposition and now in government, I've turned to Alan Milburn for advice. He has been with me in opposition and in government, helping to shape Labour's reform agenda, advising me as the Secretary of State. And of course, at meetings that Alan Milburn has attended that I have invited him to, I have chosen to share papers with him and every other attendee of meetings. Nothing commercially sensitive, nothing inappropriate, but certainly I've invited him to attend meetings because he's an outstanding former Health Secretary, and I'm proud to have Alan Milburn's support and advice, and I'm proud that Alan Milburn, Patricia Hewitt, John Reid, Andy Burnham, Alan Johnson all delivered the shortest waiting times and the highest patient satisfaction in history.
Mr. Streeting, if your predecessor Victoria Atkins was bringing somebody in to meetings at the Department for Health and sharing official sensitive documents with them, and they had no official role, they were completely unelected and unaccountable to the electorate, you'd have something to say about it. When she was Home Secretary, Suella Braverman shared official documents with John Hayes, who was an actual elected Tory MP, and she got in trouble with the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner. So why are you sharing official documents with a man who I appreciate has an illustrious history within the Labour Party, but he doesn't actually have an official role? What's he doing in private meetings?
Alan Milburn is an outstanding former Health Secretary.
Why is he in official meetings? I'm proud that he's rolled his sleeves up to help us. And Alan Milburn is also a member of the Privy Council. And look, the bottom line is this. Jacob Rees-Mogg is a member of the Privy Council. Do you want to invite him along?
These are meetings that I convene to look at the NHS reform agenda. I decide who attends and I decide what they see, and I'm very proud that we have a former Labour Health Secretary with an outstanding record in government advising this government.
What's his official role?
I very much hope that we will get Alan Milburn. I'm very much hope we will get Alan on board in an official
Has
capacity.
he got
That's up to him.
Well, just...
But I'm delighted. I'm delighted to have his. I'm delighted and proud to have his support.
Does he have a pass for the Department for Health?
I don't know, actually.
Shouldn't you find out, because he doesn't have an actual job there?
But he's a former...
Right, so that was a clip of Wes Streeting, our weasel of a health secretary, defending the bringing on board in an indeterminate and unelected capacity the former Labour Health Secretary, Alan Milburn, into the health department. Being completely unelected, he is completely unaccountable to us, the British public. This, therefore, is a problem. And all Streeting could sneer was that he makes no apologies for doing it, that Milburn has been advising him in opposition and continues to in government, that Streeting has invited him to certain meetings. Was that where confidential information was discussed? Well, Streeting wouldn't confirm or deny any of that. In fact, he openly admitted to doing so and declared that as health secretary he can do what he likes. He'd love to get Milburn in on an official capacity, the man behind so many of Labour's PFI schemes in the NHS under Tony Blair, but couldn't even reveal whether he had an official pass. I'd be amazed, given how Streeting eulogised him, if he didn't, to be honest. There you might be thinking, Damo, you've gone to the dark side. You're using a clip of GB News. You've talked about how ridiculous that outfit is before, and my views on that, frankly, haven't changed, rest assured. They are. Their bias is inherently towards the right wing. Indeed, the presenter there, Camilla Tominey, is a long-time writer for the Tory Graph. Her bias is as nailed on as the station she's working for there in that capacity. And it is a fact she would never hold a Tory in Streeting's position to that same level of scrutiny. Of that I am certain, in my view. Bringing up Suella Braverman's case is easy now that is history, after all, as she just did in that clip. But the fact remains, more mainstream media outlets should be holding Streeting and other ministers to that level of scrutiny. And any other government minister as well, but they don't do that. What we should all be mindful of is the selective scrutiny and the bias shown by any station we actually watch or any newspaper we actually read. All news outlets, all media outlets have an inherent inbuilt bias. This one does. This channel does. I'm left-wing, I admit it. It is more obvious with an organisation like GB News, I would argue, when it comes to more mainstream outlets. So when Labour are very much right-wing these days as well, how far to the right GBeebies are now should be a talking point as well. Nevertheless, though, it is impossible to argue that Streeting wasn't held to account for a really important point here. Tominey raised the case of Braverman discussing matters relating to refugees with a backbench Tory MP with huge influence, leader of the so-called anti-woke common sense group of Tory MPs on their right of even their own party, as far to the right as they had already lurked at the time of this mess back in 2022. Braverman got a telling off by parliamentary standards over it, and that was, of course, as Tominey said, a discussion with matters of government with another elected MP, though. Alan Milburn is not even that. He's not elected in any capacity at all. He has no official role whatsoever. He is simply a former Labour Health Secretary. That's it. Another example I'm minded to recall that I think is more relevant to this Streeting case is the scandal that involved then Defence Secretary Liam Fox and him bringing a chap called Adam Werrity along to meetings. Werrity was simply Fox's mate, a former flatmate who enjoyed foreign trips with Fox in that defence capacity. Again, like Milburn, had no security clearance, no official role, was not even employed in any way by the Ministry of Defence. He was just a spare part, along at Fox's pleasure, and it saw Fox end up resigning in disgrace. This business with Milburn is even worse than that, actually, because not only does he not have any of the clearances to be involved in Streeting's team in pretty much exactly the same way Adam Werrity didn't, Milburn does, however, have vested interests in privatised health, which we know Streeting champions. And you are left wondering if that is because he has had Milburn as a flea in his ear for so long, a private health lobbyist, as Milburn has been since he left Parliament. While it was the Tories under John Major that introduced private finance initiatives, or PFI, it was under Blair and with Alan Milburn as his health secretary who drove that as well, to effectively allow private sector interests to put their cash into the NHS and take a return directly out of it, effectively piling debt onto the NHS books and off the government books. Labour looked great at eliminating government debt, but just piled it onto the services we all rely on. Much of the Labour manifesto, much of what Rachel Reeves and Starmer have said about growth being generated despite them putting no money in, very much implies that the PFIs which burdened the NHS with so much debt are likely to be seen in other sectors too now that they're in government, and we need to look out for that. Because when you start burdening essential services with debt, it makes it harder for them to deliver on the services we all rely on, and it should be opposed all the time, every step of the way. It is privatisation by stealth. Just a slightly different way of doing it than the Tories have been doing for the last 14 years, allowing Labour to essentially court private health while saying they are different from the Tories. Now you might be thinking, Milburn has been out of health for some time, perhaps he's had a change of heart in all of this, perhaps he acknowledges the mistakes of PFI, perhaps he will be pointing these out to Streeting where the pitfalls are, and I dare say that he could very well do that. But the rich making money off of healthcare is not going to be one of them, not when he's finding it so lucrative himself. Since leaving frontline politics, Milburn has been very busy with his portfolio of consultancies, and they very much include private health interests. An article in the Morning Star from October 2022, where he and his family made some £2.1 million from consultancies, not all health related, but a significant chunk of that portfolio is to do with private health. Here's an excerpt from that article telling you all about it, to get a read on Milburn if you're not familiar with him. He has had a lucrative post-politics career with corporate consultancies, including for firms profiting from his health reforms. Milburn channels some, probably all, of this income through his firm AM Strategies. The latest AM Strategies account shows the bumper £2.141 million payout to shareholders. There are 4 shareholders, Milburn, his wife, and their 2 grown-up children. Assuming the dividend was paid in proportion, Milburn got about £1.5 million, his wife about £329,000, and his children each got about £107,000. Milburn is also Chancellor of Lancaster University, which describes his business interests. It says his advisory business has corporate and government clients across the globe. Amongst others, he advises Mars Incorporated and the Centene Corporation. He is chair of the advisory board at Bridgepoint Capital, the leading mid-market private equity group, and serves on a number of its portfolio company boards. He is a board director at Ribera Salud, one of Europe's most integrated healthcare systems, and is board chair of Huma, the digital health business. He is a senior advisor to PricewaterhouseCoopers Government and Health Industries Practice. So it looks like all of this advisory and consultancy business is behind that handsome payout of Milburn's there. Milburn's been working for Bridgepoint Capital since 2004. This private equity firm in turn does well from NHS outsourcing by buying and selling private health firms that were NHS suppliers. US health giant the Centene Corporation has been trying to break into outsourced NHS services for years. As well as privately advising these firms, Milburn also publicly promotes NHS outsourcing, though not without controversy. Last year, the BBC issued a rare apology for failing to tell viewers that its Newsnight pundit pushing NHS privatisation, Milburn, was not just a former health secretary, but also has much more current and very lucrative interests in health privatisation. Milburn appeared on Newsnight last November on a segment on the NHS where he pushed his familiar call for more partnerships with the private sector. Newsnight identified Milburn as the former New Labour Health Secretary, even though that was 18 years ago at the time. It failed to identify his more current potential interests in health outsourcing due to his roles with Bridgepoint, Centene or PricewaterhouseCoopers. I think it would be a safe assumption to say Milburn hasn't changed his tune on the value of NHS privatisation, in which case the value to him personally seems a high one, and with Streeting bringing him in, he's not an impartial player at all. He's a private healthcare lobbyist in all sense of the name. And GBeebies did, as much as it grates to admit it, a good job in raising this. If Milburn promotes the likes of Centene or any other health clients he might have by this point, he would be helping to some sort of degree or other shape Labour NHS policy in a manner that may personally benefit him, and Streeting defends that. He's effectively become a lobbyist for private health interests since leaving politics. So do you honestly believe he won't be lobbying from within with Streeting having opened the doors wide for him? Labour corruption is already blatant, so sure of themselves, so safe do they feel behind that big majority of theirs, but they really shouldn't feel so comfortable, and Streeting over this, compared to Braverman, compared to Fox, ought to be in a lot of trouble, given this, to my mind, is blatantly worse than anything those individuals did. Coming back to defence, though, since I brought it up earlier, another massive scandal that is going very underreported comes back to the matter of Trident right now, our nuclear arms deterrent, or is it ours anymore? We don't actually have a say in it anymore because Keir Starmer just gave that away. Get the details of that story in this video recommendation here, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.